and screen share. All right, we'll give folks a few minutes to start signing on. And if you're joining us, please use the chat to let us know where you're joining us from and what you've got in your glass, especially if you've got some Willamette Valley wine in your glass. Bonus points if you have Willamette Valley wine in your glass made by a mom. But we want to hear about what you're drinking regardless.
Anna and Wynne, I want to hear what you guys have in your glass, but I guess we're not allowed to ask that yet.
We will go over that in a moment. Yeah, I was saving that one because I know you guys all have stories behind what you're drinking. But you know, we've got a whole bunch of very punctual people here, which I love to see. So let's get started. Welcome everyone to What's It Like to Be a Winemaker Mom. I'm very excited about this session. I'm Julia Burke from the Willamette Valley Wineries Association. With me, Anna Matzinger of Matzinger-Davies, Jessica Mozeico of Fille Wines, and Wynne Peterson-Nedry of Ridgecrest, RR Wines, and 00 Wines. And I would love to start out by just having each of you share how long you've been a winemaker, a little bit about your winery, and how long you've been a mom. Anna, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief. My first harvest in winemaking was way back in 1994 for Beringer Vineyards, a long time ago, ancient history. And I was there for a little bit. Beringer Vineyards is in St. Helena in Napa, California, and I worked there for a little while and then spent some time in New Zealand and Australia and back to California and back to Australia and back to New Zealand and then to Oregon. So I've been here in Oregon for 20 years. My partner and I came up for the 1999 harvest, and we thought we would just, work the vintage and then carry on our traveling winemaking by going to Chile and Burgundy, but we're still here 20 years later, and we are married, and we have two lovely children. They are now 14 and 11, almost 15 and 12. And we started, I suppose I'm speaking about Matzinger-Davies Wine Company, which we started in 2006. So when we arrived to the Willamette Valley, Michael worked at Chehalem with Wynne's dad, and we actually lived with Wynne's dad for a couple of years, Grandpa. And I worked for Archery Summit, and I was there for 14 years before leaving in 2013. And since then have been focusing on Matzinger-Davies and children and doing a little consulting winemaking.
Awesome, thank you. Jessica?
I'm Jessica Mozeico from Fille Wines, and my father and I co-founded our winery in 2003. Fille means and daughter in French. And so I've been in the industry for 18 years, but to be clear, my background is not in wine, and I never had on my radar anything about wine. I had more of a traditional biotech corporate background. So I was a science major undergrad, worked in pharmaceutical and biotech strategy consulting, then went to business school, then went to brand management and product development and marketing in biotechnology. Along the way, my father, who had been making wine in the garage the whole time I was growing up, said, I think I might want to start a winery. And I said, that's a great idea. You should go do it. And he said, well, I'd really like to do it with a partner. And so we started the winery together. So when we started, it was really me running the marketing and sales and the business side of things. And then with the idea that I would transition into winemaking, we made the wine together, but truly he was the brains behind the operation. He passed away very suddenly in 2017. So I would answer the question of when I started making wine really by saying 2017, although I had been doing it the 14 years, that was when I felt that I was more in the driver's seat, so to speak, unexpectedly. So I would say I got a late start on the winemaking side of things because I was not anticipating that. And I also got a late start in the mom side of things because I had my daughter, who's an only child. I'm a single mom, late in life. I had her when I was 42 years old.
Thanks, Jess. And Wynne?
I'm Wynne Peterson-Nedry. I've been in the wine industry, I guess, all my life, but I would say actively for the last 15 years. I decided to do my first vintage, real vintage, full vintage in 2006 and went to New Zealand first for that and worked with another winemaker mom right off the bat. I wanted to learn from a woman winemaker when I did my first full vintage, and that was fantastic. I worked with Claire Mulholland down in New Zealand at Martinborough Vineyard. She's now at Burn Cottage. She's a fantastic lady and I learned a lot from her. And then I actually think she worked Harvest of 99 with Michael, Anna, right?
Yep.
With your husband. So at Chehalem, which is pretty fantastic. Small world there. But I've been part of the family business since 2009. That's when I officially came on board as assistant winemaker at Chehalem, and then head winemaker in 2012. And then in 2018, my dad and I split off to kind of do our own thing and started Ridgecrest Wines, which is the name of our vineyard. We'd been doing RR wines in tandem at Chehalem for a number of years. And then I also got hired on to be the head winemaker at 00 Wines that same year. So both of those brands are being made under the same facility. And as far as momhood goes, I'm pretty new to the game. I've got, as you can hear in the background, sorry, this is kind of what this whole panel is about, right? Having a kid and doing other things at the same time.
Keeping it real, Wynne.
Yeah, I'm keeping it real. Became a mom right after Christmas of last year. So December 27th, which is also Julian's grandpa's birthday. So my dad, so 3 generations and 2 of them have the same birthday now for our family in the wine industry.
I didn't realize they shared a birthday. That's so cute.
Yeah, yeah.
I know everyone was excited to talk about what's in your glass. I asked you all to open up something that has significance for you. Anna, you want to start?
Sure. I've got 2005 from Archery Summit from Red Hills Estate. So I worked at Archery Summit from 1999 through to 2013. In 2002, became the winemaker and started to co-GM with my good friend Lee Bartholomew, who grew the grapes, and I made the wine. And together we were co-GMing the facility and the vineyards and the tasting room and the direct sales and the guest houses and all the things. 2005 was also a banner year. It was a year that Michael had left. He started with Chehalem and left Chehalem, and we had decided we should make some wine together, that was an inevitability. So we were planning that, and then we got engaged. And then a day before Michael was going to head off to Burgundy for harvest, we learned that we were pregnant, or I was pregnant, really. So it was a great vintage, actually. Michael left, and I went to work, and I just worked and slept. And every day at 11:30, I would call the public phone box in the center of Gevrey-Chambertin. And if Michael was finished with work at 8:30 p.m., he would kind of be hanging around. And thank you, Archery Summit, for allowing me to make those calls every day during the 2005 vintage. But it's interesting making wine and being pregnant and having your, some of your faculties of perception change due to that. But I had a really terrific team. The universe conspired to help make really, really lovely wines that vintage, and I remember it fondly.
How's that tasting right now, the 2005? I love that vintage.
It's kind of great.
Awesome. Jessica, what are you drinking?
I will tell you what I'm drinking, but I first have to confess that I was very intimidated about doing this panel on this topic because, as Anna knows, because I was talking to her about it the other day, because I feel like these are both two topics where I am definitely learning and in process. And in fact, I will confess that at 10:30 last night, I actually Googled winemaking moms to see if there would be some fountain of knowledge that I could share with you all today. And it turns out there's no easy button. So I just want to say that these are all things that we're, or at least speaking for myself, I'm definitely learning as we go here. But I am drinking a glass of the Fille Rosé. It's actually this year's Rosé. And the reason that I am is, number one, I feel like it's a nice enough day outside in the Willamette Valley to have a glass of rosé. And also, my daughter Gabriella was born, as I said, I was 42 years old. She was born 2 months prematurely. And so we spent the first month of her life in the hospital. And I had an emergency C-section. And when I was able to go see her in the NICU the next morning, the neonatologist said to me, "Welcome to your new full-time job. Whatever you were doing before, I don't care. Your only job is to get this little one to survive." So that's an experience that is such a strong foundation for me, that it is, I feel so extremely lucky that Gabriella is now completely healthy and developmentally normal, that it's really important to me to give back to organizations that are dedicated to prematurity research and advocacy. So the point is that a portion of sales of our rosé goes to supporting the March of Dimes March for Babies, which is an organization that supports prematurity. And also this March for Babies, which actually was just this past Saturday, is a complete celebration of NICU alumni. So that's why I have it in my glass now. And oh my gosh, Julian is so adorable.
Thanks.
Oh, cute.
He didn't want to be in the car seat or hanging out on the sidelines. He wanted to be part of the action. I told you before everybody else got on that he has a little bit of FOMO, a little bit of fear of missing out. So
well, should I be asking what's in his glass?
He's got the vintage white wine today. We'll have more of it for dinner too. In my glass, I've got the first vintage that I helped bottle up for 00, which is 2017. I wasn't actually officially part of that vintage yet, but I finished all the wines in the cellar and I put them into bottle, and it was the first vintage of my connection to that amazing brand, and being a part of and being trusted with the Willamette Valley side of 00 wines and making some amazing Chardonnays. And part of the reason that I chose that wine is because during my pregnancy, I found that everything that was red seemed overly tannic to me. So I got, not that I wasn't already, but I got on a real kick of drinking a lot of white wines. White has always kind of been my preference, but especially after this last vintage, I was drinking a lot. Well, I wasn't drinking at all really, but I preferred white wines if I was going to have a taste of something. So I thought it was a really fun vintage and a meaningful vintage for me to have become part of something that wasn't the family business. I grew up thinking that I would always be part of just the family business and be the winemaker for that forever. And sometimes life throws you curveballs and you pivot. And I think that's a lot of what being a mom is about too. So figuring out the best fit and making the most of what you have, the talents you have, and the opportunities you have, and finding other amazing things to do, other amazing people to work with, and great wines to make. So I have the great advantage that I'm able to do both now, which is maybe me putting too much on my plate, especially with a baby now, but I love it. And I'm always trying to do my best and make the most of my time. So I'd rather be busy than bored is what I always say.
That's great. I should, full disclosure, everybody, I am not a mom. However, on April 16th, I became an aunt for the first time. So I am actually drinking some Willamette Valley bubbles from Sokoblosser. So I am celebrating that and
Congrats.
excited to hear some great advice and wisdom from these moms that I can pass on to my sister. So I am curious, and anybody can take this one first, but Wynne, I kind of feel like this is like the most new for you. What was the last year like with COVID, with the pandemic, being a mom, being a winemaker, running a business? How's that been for all of you?
It was the most bizarre harvest I've ever been a part of. I'm going to go ahead and say that just because of COVID. And we had wildfires here that started on Labor Day, and I was pregnant and making, you know, a couple different brands of wine. And yeah, just navigating the new norm for us, I guess. The possibilities were endless of things that could happen. And I think it showed me how strong we as women and as winemakers can be, and how even if we're thrown curveballs right and left, we can pivot and make it work. And I thought it was actually probably one of the smoothest harvests I've had in a couple of years. So that was nice. Maybe it's also being prepared enough to plan. I'm very detail oriented and very planning oriented. So having enough foresight to plan everything really well. I think that's the new norm for me as well, is making sure that I have things planned ahead of time, and it makes everything work a little bit better. But especially with, you know, planning your time in a facility. It's a shared facility where I work, where everybody had to kind of schedule time out if they were coming in because of COVID, and you can't have too many people in the same area at once. And, you know, making sure that everybody had safety precautions, especially since pregnant women are more at risk of getting serious effects from COVID. So just a lot of that stuff. We were resilient, and it ended up being, you know, other than the wildfires, a great harvest.
That's great. Jessica, what about you?
So I think Wynne answered the question that I was thinking about in terms of how was it from a winemaking perspective, and what it meant for us as managing the vintage. I would, I guess, answer it from two perspectives. One is the point of view of a mom and a daughter, and then secondly, as a small business owner. So, you know, when my dad died, my daughter Gabriella and I moved in with my mom. So we have 3 generations living together. And of course, when you're sheltering in place for a long period of time, I just felt so extremely lucky, especially as I looked around and saw so many of my mother's friends who were not able to see their grandchildren. I felt so extremely lucky that we were able to be in place together. And I really felt like I had the people who I needed right there in my pod. So I felt extremely lucky. I will also say that being a mother and a daughter when you're living with your mother and daughter is also a different experience, because sometimes I'll see things or I'll want to make something that was different than my mom did, but it's happening in real time, because I'll see it in real time and I'll have to say, wait, is that my issue? Or what is my issue as a daughter, and what is my issue as a mother? And even if we don't live with our parents, I think that those of us that are in the sandwich generation or era of our lives often feel that way. And then from the point of view of being a small business owner, this is not specific. Whoa, we have a special guest star. Hold on, Gabriella, can you just say a quick hello? I'm on a panel, so you
Hi, Gabriella.
Yes.
Hi, Mommy.
Yes.
We're gonna go to Snyder, and we're gonna bring some raisins, a snack.
Okay, that sounds
Bye.
great. I love you, sweetheart. I'll see you in a little while. Bye, baby.
Bye, Mom.
Bye. Okay.
This is the cutest panel ever.
Actually, on that note, that's the other thing that's happened as a result of COVID is no boundaries. No, doesn't matter who is on the Zoom. She's a part of everything. She wants to look at people and see who they are and what they're doing. But okay, so the other thing I was going to say about being a small business owner is that, you know, it was a matter of adaptability, and it's a constant sense of needing to anticipate what's next and to not get too entrenched in the phase you thought you just got used to. And that's the same thing as motherhood as well, is every time you think that you've got this, your kids are in a different phase. So.
Anna?
I would definitely echo those last points you made, Jessica, that, once you think I got this, like, oh my gosh, they're so different now this morning for some reason. What happened? For us, I would say, COVID's been really interesting. I feel incredibly, incredibly lucky that our family has been safe, and most people we know in our sort of circles, it's really brought us closer together. And I think one of the fundamental things that's sort of a motherhood skill and a winemaker skill is presence and observation. And if COVID has offered anything, it's the ability to be present. And I think for kids that sometimes as a mom, you feel like you have to do things, you have to be doing all the things. Just like as a winemaker, you feel like you need to be doing the things, because why are you being paid unless you're doing things? But sometimes it's better to just observe and be present. And we've been able to do that, greatly. I work from home when I'm not in a winery or out in a vineyard, so it has allowed me to be home with the kids who have been at school for a whole year in their bedrooms, which has been kind of weird, and last year I remember thinking, like, the second week in, at the end of March, beginning of April, like, it kind of feels like traveling, it's almost like, it feels like we're in a different country, when we stay in an Airbnb and we're kind of like tight and the rest of the world is outside, and we have this thing that we're doing together. We've been doing it all year long, and that has been really, really positive.
That's great. Do any of you, now, Wynne, I know this is probably not a question for you, but for Anna and Jessica, but maybe, I don't want to presume, do your kids help out with the vineyard, with the winery? Do they help out with anything around your job? And do you see them following in your footsteps or see signs of that?
I'm going to go ahead and take a pass on this. As far as future generation go, I'm going to let him make up his own mind, but obviously he's not really doing much in the vineyard or the winery yet. Although he has been with me many times to both, so that's about it so far. It's mostly just him distracting me from being efficient.
Our kids have been dragged to many, many a vineyard. That gets more interesting for them if there are vehicles around that they can drive. We've learned, if there's a four-wheeler or a golf cart, that is infinitely more enticing than just walking another row, which is so boring. Or if there are opportunities for swimming, those are key attributes. Wineries are in general places with multiple hazards depending upon where you are and how big of a facility you make wine in. So we haven't had our kids in the winery very much, but on occasion they have lent a hand. I think they both appreciate our work, and having both parents be winemakers is kind of like the thing in stereo for sure. I think they appreciate the craft, they appreciate the creativity, they appreciate the connection to nature and the occasional good meal. More and more so as the older they get, they appreciate that more and more. When they were little, they didn't appreciate that part at all. Mushrooms, ooh, we don't want that. I suspect that they will follow different pursuits as there's no expectation from either of us that they would fall into winemaking, but they both have very good vocabularies, and they are both very, very good at smelling stuff and talking about it.
That's awesome. Jessica?
I would say really similarly, Anna, Gabriella has certain, she's 5, but she has certain proclivities or, raw skills or whatnot that I am excited by. Like last week, she had some orange juice and she said, this is really good orange juice. It's not freshly squeezed, but very high acid. And so, she has a palate that is, because she's used to, that's how we talk. And I love that she is most comfortable when she's digging in the dirt and playing with worms. So for those reasons, I think that she has the power of observation, and that's certainly something that I think would be important. But I really am careful to not put pressure on her and to not, to put some boundaries around the expectations for her. When my dad and I started the winery together, obviously we named it A-Fille, meaning and daughter. So there was some degree of pressure there. But, I remember my dad telling me many times, if you decide later that you don't want to carry forth with it, that's fine. And similarly, I don't want Gabriella to feel that she has a predetermined path. So I think about that now, you know, I mean, I do draw certain boundaries with her. And I think that it's important, given the name of our winery, given the story, given the desire that I have to be authentic and transparent, she plays a role in the winery, but I'm very careful to not, like, here's an example. We have named a wine the Gabriella Pinot Noir. So I put her name on it, but I don't put her face to imagery that you see for the winery. I do have a lot of photography of her, not with her face, but I just feel like I want to protect her privacy. And that's something that, you know, it's important, and I don't know the right way. And sometimes I figure it out by making a mistake or feeling like, oh, that was probably too much sharing, or it was, you know, whatever, not bringing her in enough. So I do feel it's important to let kids decide their own path.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And this is a question for anyone, I'm curious what skills you think transfer most from winemaking to motherhood, and vice versa. Does being a mom make you a better winemaker, and does being a winemaker make you a better mom?
Absolutely. All of the skills. It's all of the skills. You know, it's what I said before, presence and observation and adaptation and boundary setting, but curiosity and openness, multitasking, juggling many things with grace or the attempts at grace. I think, you know, winemaking is not the only business that involves ego, but there can be some ego in winemaking. And then back to this idea that if you're a winemaker and you're hired to make wine, you feel like you should be, you know, doing something to kind of pay your way. And sometimes I think for some winemakers, not all of them, but sometimes one of the hardest things that you ever learn is the ability to stop and not do, and take a pause and listen and observe and not fuss. You know, I'll give you an example. I arrived at a terrific winery when I arrived as a, you know, young harvest help. The wines were being punched down during harvest 6 times a day. Now this is for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, this is Pinot Noir winemaking, red grapes. They go into an open top tank, and during the course of fermentation, you need to squish the cap down because the carbon dioxide is forming this cap of skins and seeds, and you need to push this down to aerate the tank to incorporate the skins into your mass. And, you know, doing this 6 times a day is kind of insane. It's very, the objective is to get greater concentration. The objective is to get greater structure, but that's a lot, you know, like maybe the wine doesn't need that. Maybe the best decision is to not to do that with every single tank. Maybe we don't need to do that. And so just being able to kind of address fermentations and children as individuals and assess their needs as individuals, I think, you know, I think the skills of nurture have helped me absolutely as a mother and a parent, and definitely as a winemaker, because that's really what we're doing. We're not, I mean, making makes it sound like we're doing this amazing thing, but the reality is what we're doing is nurturing something that is a very natural process, and we're standing by and we're making sure that the child does not fall off the catwalk or the counter or climb up and get in the cupboard and drink all the Tylenol. You know, that's what we're doing. We're just kind of trying to help and facilitate, and those skills are very transferable in both cases, I think.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it there, Anna. I was going to say guiding things along in the right path, and making sure they find their own way and show their own strengths. But I think as a winemaker and a mom, to get to Julia's question about whether one makes you better at the other or not, I think winemaking in general has taught me a lot, especially being a head winemaker or the only person doing things in the cellar most days. it's made me very good at multitasking. So the fact that I can have a conversation right now as he's breaking down a little bit and kind of trying to stay on track, maybe says something to it, but yeah, you can be upset if you want. Here, you want to watch? I think being adaptable and being efficient and guiding things in the right direction is exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, and I like, Wynne, I like that you said you used the word guiding, because for me, first of all, I would say that being well, actually, first, I want to say my experience and my comments have to do with parenthood. There's nothing specific about being a mom, in my opinion, versus just being a parent. I just don't have the experience of having been a father. So I just would say that there's no question that being a mom makes me a better person. And one of those things is also a better worker. And it happens to be in winemaking. But, you know, when I was younger in my corporate world, the way I succeeded was by being right, and by having the right answer and being good with numbers and analyzing and making good decisions. And there was numbers that quantitatively proved that worth. And that skill set of what it takes as critical success factors is very different than in winemaking, as I think Anna clearly said, and also in being a parent. You can't focus on I'm the one that has the right objective answer, but rather how do I, as Wynne said, guide that we're going to get to the place that I may have a vision of how it's going to end, and you may have a vision of what outcome you want, and you can do all you can to nurture it, and then you need to let go and see what happens. And I think that's the case in both wine and also parenthood. That has been a real shift for me. I also think that when I had Gabriella, and I will just say that it's hard for me to put in discrete buckets that it's parenthood, because for me, becoming a winemaker was so closely tied to my dad's unexpected death that I don't know whether it was death or birth that caused this, but I had a very distinct value shift towards sustainability. Sustainability of our business, sustainability of environmental factors, sustainable winemaking. And it was really about preservation for the next generation. And that also shifted how I wanted to run the business. I wanted to be very clear that we were committed to sustainable winemaking, community, diversity and equity, those things that were very important to me, that were important to how I wanted to run my little ecosystem, whether my ecosystem was the winery or my family. Those became very important value shifts.
That's awesome. Thank you. All three of you have, Jessica, you've alluded to your experience in the corporate world, and all three of you run businesses where you call the shots now, but have worked other jobs where you didn't. As moms, what can employers do to make the wine world better for moms? And if you have any experiences from your own life, or if you just want to talk about, like, theoretically what would be a good thing, I think that would be really helpful. But the wine industry is a big place, and I've talked to a lot of women in various aspects of it who have had very different experiences. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, Julia, I think that's a fantastic question. But I'd like to reframe it that it's not about what employers can do, and it's about what we as employees can do, because I don't think that there is any sort of, I can't say that there's no top-down structural weighting, but I think it's important that we're all empowered to create the cultures and the environments and the workplaces that we want to. And one way that I think is really important that happens has already happened this year, which is, you know, when I worked in corporate life, I mean, look, I'm a biracial woman, and there were a whole lot fewer women in leadership positions in biotech corporate life than there are in wine now. So one of the ways that I got to a leadership position was by being extremely professional and keeping a separation between my work life and my family life or my home life, personal life. And that really shifted, number one, because I went through my dad's death, which was a very public grieving process for me. And number two, because in wine, it's really different. We as humans want to know about the things, how they were created. So whether it's that we're interested in the lives of artists or chefs or winemakers, what's more important in wine, I think, is work-life integration, not separation. But I think that we've all been through that with COVID and working from home. So we've had like a crash course in work-life integration. But I think that's an important component that will help facilitate working parents in general.
I feel like we're seeing that evolution in real time now. I think that 10, 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. And I think a way in which, at least in my experience, the wine industry is maybe different from the corporate world is to get ahead and to prove your worth and value as a female winemaker. I think for a lot of female winemakers, it isn't just being good enough. You know, you have to be better on so many levels, and you have to have such a broad skill set. You know, you have to be able to fix the bottling line, and how about run the bottling line and load the truck and drive the forklift and fill up the gas tanks and clean the toilets and, you know, lift heavy stuff and move heavy things and make smart decisions and think while you're doing all of this other stuff that's physical. You know, it's a different, at least my experience, I think it's a really sort of different world, and it's very easy to take on a lot. I'm looking at Wynne here, knowing that Wynne is a very hard worker, physically, just physically and mentally, because I have seen you. And that's all well and good. It's harder to do that well when you have other people to think about and take care of. And I think you alluded to this before, Wynne, that one thing that happens is you become smarter, and the ability to work smarter is just kind of fundamental, I think, to finding success in winemaking for women. I also think, you know, hiring more women, and we need all of the women, all of the colors, all of the backgrounds, all of the shapes and sizes in this industry. And there has been, I can speak to this, just a wholesale change in the last 20 years, particularly in Oregon, but I think the world over. You know, 20 years ago, there were 5 of us who could sit around the table who were women in winemaking. And, you know, now in the Willamette Valley or the North Willamette Valley, there are 80 to 100, maybe more than that, women who are really, you know, in top positions in terms of winemaking and cellar work and viticulture work. And that is huge. And that's really helpful to other women, particularly, you know, when you have babies. And how do you balance it all? Balancing motherhood and career is really, really hard. And particularly if you're used to working physically hard and you need to make a shift to like, how do I still do this? How do I show up before everyone and stay until all the work is done and do all of the thinking? You know, you just can't. You have to be smarter about it and more realistic. And I think there's such a greater acceptance now of that realism that is part of life, and having a more balanced situation that, you know, it makes you a better worker. It doesn't make you less of a worker if you're not staying at the winery for 12 hours a day every day.
I've found a lot of parallels between motherhood, like working while being a mother, and this year of COVID as well. So I found a lot of, and maybe it's just my experience because this is the first time I've had a kid and it's been during COVID, and I can see a lot of similarities in the way that you have to work during a pandemic and you have to work as a mother. So as we just said, you know, pivoting, working smarter, getting more accomplished in a short amount of time if you can only be at a physical location for, you know, a certain number of days a week, and working smarter during that time. And just organizing. I organize every week so that I can get everything done at the winery that I need to, and maybe not be out there as much as I used to, because A, it's a pandemic and we can't all be out there at the same time, and B, because somebody gets fussy in the afternoons. And you know, you have to pivot and be able to work at night a little bit and be with people that understand that flexibility in your schedule is a good thing and not a detriment.
Yeah. When you made me think of something, which is that the three of us may have I don't know, we all have the experience of we have control over our cultures to some degree. I mean, I'd like to think that everyone has control of their cultures, but I think that we can certainly set the pace in terms of the respect that we give to our teams so that we have that flexibility that Wynne's talking about. That, you know, I tell my team all the time, you're going to get emails from me at 10 o'clock after I put Gabriella to bed and after I clean the kitchen and whatnot. Please don't answer them then. And please know that in order for me to function well, I'm going to do things at really off hours. But that doesn't mean I expect you to. You need to do what works for your schedule and your personal life, and I need to take care of mine. So I think that that's part of it, is realizing that we're empowered to make some of those trade-offs. I mean, it's the same thing as one of the things that's obviously different in wine than other things is the seasonality demands. There is no such thing as, you know, showing up, I don't know, 20 hours a week during harvest. It's not going to happen. But what you can do is throw yourself into it and set the expectation with your loved ones and your family that, yeah, I am going to be very not so present. And then I'm going to be very present in other seasons, essentially.
Thank you guys all. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing all your stories in this conversation of how to normalize being a mom in any job, but in the wine industry and as a woman in the wine industry, you know, hearing how it's changed. It really makes me very grateful for all three of you that you were willing to share today and that you're willing to talk about your experiences, because the more we talk about it, the more normal it is and the better we are all off. So thank you for that. I have a more kind of lighthearted next question. I want to hear any funny stories you have from Winemaker Mom life, or what's your peak Winemaker Mom moment? If you think about, like, when was I in peak Winemaker Mom mode? What would that be?
Okay.
I've got
go ahead.
Okay, I've got two. Well, I probably have more than that, but I'm going to just stop with two. So, we do a lot of wine tasting at home, having two winemakers here, and our kitchen table is often filled with bottles and samples, and this has been going on for a long time. When my son Otto was 3 and I was home on maternity leave with little Elsa, this would have been the summer of 2009, so working on the 2008 vintage, working on the blends, and, you know, maternity leave was sort of farcical. It lasted a little while, but it wasn't really leave. It was just slight disconnection and then reconnection immediately. Anyway, suffice it to say, there were lots of samples that came home. There was lots of me sitting at the table, you know, swirling, tasting, writing notes. And one day I looked over to the end of the table and Otto's sitting in his cute little IKEA chair, and he's got 2 sippy cups of, well, one has milk in it, and he's 3. He's swirling his milk, takes a sip, spits it out into his other cup. So that is just crazy. That's only a winemaker's kid right there for you. And then I think when Elsa was probably 5 or 6, we were again sitting around the table and talking about a wine. And then I think I was I was presenting something and needed to sort of talk about what I was going to talk about. And Elsa looks at me with a little eye roll and says, "Oh, Mom, you're going to say acidity. You always talk about acidity."
I love those. So I have 2. One is actually not really a winemaking mom story, but it's it actually, Wynne, something you said at the beginning when you said that red wine was too tannic for you. You were talking about during pregnancy. It's a pregnancy story, which is that when I was pregnant, so, you know, when you have a cork supplier, your corks generally are supposed to have a TCA or corked rate somewhere around less than 1%. And I called our cork sales rep and told him that our cork taint rate had suddenly gone up to over 10%. And I was 100% convinced that I was right and he was wrong. And no matter what data he showed me, he was clearly wrong, which I later thought, a few months later, after I had Gabriella, I called him back and I was like, you'll never believe it. It's down again. Something happened. It's so strange. My dad was still alive. And my dad said, you think something changed out there in the world. You don't think something changed within you and your perception. But then the other thing that's happened more recently is that, so Gabriella's in online kindergarten and they do a lot of writing, and the teacher asks a prompt and they have to draw a picture and write out the thing. So then I go and check it later, and it said, the question apparently was, what did you do this weekend? And her answer was, I went to the winery again with my mom. And I thought, oh my gosh, I should probably tell her teacher that I'm a winemaker, what she thinks I'm doing. I think those are my two moments.
I don't have as many winemaker children moments yet for Julian, at least, but I have plenty of winemaker children moments for myself, and maybe that can suffice. And I kind of have an idea of what he's coming up against.
That's perfect. And then we'll check back with you in 5 years.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, things could change in 5 months a lot by now. Yeah. My favorite times as a winemaker kid was always right around harvest, and being able to be out in the vineyard and be part of nature, see the ripening process, and more or less being a taste tester for when things are almost ready to pick. So if it was ripe enough for me to want to grab, put into a Ziploc bag, squish it all up and drink as much juice as I possibly can and get like crazy sugar rush, it was probably pretty close to being ready to pick for the winery. I feel like I have a very good barometer of when to pick fruit as a winemaker now because of my experiences as a child growing up in a vineyard. And so thank you, Dad. I know you're on here for getting me primed for that ahead of time and being able to, yes, see the balance between sugar and acidity and whatnot. And probably my least favorite part of the winemaking process, at least as a child, was the monotony of wine from a child's point of view. How boring is this, that this is all my parents talk about? We have people over for dinner and every one of them is like this. And that's all they talk about at the dinner table. It's the last thing I want to do is sit in another dinner table conversation about wine as a 10-year-old. So everybody with kids, just spare them and like rent a good movie during those dinner parties. So anyway, those are my two stories.
That's awesome. Thank you. I have a question in the Q&A. And by the way, folks, if you've got Q&A, now's the time. I put them in the chat or the Q&A box, but Jessica took this one, but I'd love to hear from everybody. Are you planning to lay down any wines for your kid's birth year? Jessica, you mentioned Gabriella has one.
Yeah, I'm just still laughing about that. But yes, so because Gabriella was in the NICU, my dad came to the hospital and he said, hey, what do you think? This is 2015. He said, what do you think about, making a wine specifically for her birth year, just for this year? And I said, that's a great idea. We took 2 pieces of paper. I said, write down all the things that you would do to make a wine that's meant to age. And I did the same, and we switched lists and it was exactly the same. So I stayed in the NICU with Gabriella, and my dad went off and made that wine. We made enough in that year to just for our club and our family. So we do have a 2015 Gabriella that was made for her birth year. But then after that, after my dad died, I decided to keep doing the Gabriella, and with encouragement from Anna, actually, that was my way of honoring both my dad's idea and my dad's original plan with the wine, and also my daughter, to make our Gabriella Pinot Noir be kind of our best foot forward with a wine that's meant to age in any given vintage. and we do donate a portion of proceeds of sales from that wine back to the Providence Portland NICU, where Gabrielle and I remain active in clinical trials about improving outcomes for prematurity.
2020 is kind of a difficult vintage for me to really say whether we're gonna have a special wine for Julian. Since he was 3 days away from being a 2021 baby, we might just go with that. 2020 was a challenging vintage with the smoke, and especially for something like Pinot Noir where you would lay it down. We'll see what happens. I still very much like the vintage in a lot of aspects, but 2020 is a hard one to dedicate to somebody, you know, just the world in general. So to think about that.
Anna.
We have wines from our children's birth years, and we have some bottles that they have waxed themselves as little people, which is very cute. But I also feel like we need to have the pregnancy wines too, because maybe that's for me, but you know, they were both born in the year after, the vintage after I was pregnant with them. So there's something about that period of time that is deep and meaningful. I think for me, the experience of making wine while pregnant is a different experience than making wine when you're suddenly free, yet not free. And I will say that this is kind of, I don't know, I'm just bringing this up now, it's kind of tangential, but this idea of, you know, finding your people if you are a new mom in the wine industry or in any industry. I think I wish I had done that a little bit more, but I had a couple, well, one person in particular, Lee Bartholomew, who I worked with, who her boys are a little bit older than mine, and that was enormously helpful to have a compatriot around who had experienced similar things. And then I just also want to shout out to my husband's parents, who my husband Michael is from New Zealand, and his parents came over every year during harvest because we were both working at wineries, and it's really hard to take care of kids when you're both working harvest at different places. And they would look after the kids, and when they were very little, bring them up to the winery every afternoon for tea, which was just very lovely and enormously helpful.
It's cute. That's really cute. All right, no more questions in Q&A for right now. I guess I'm curious, do you have any advice for other winemaker moms? We have a whole bunch in the last year, including Wynne. There's been a lot of really cool new winemaker moms, and I put out a call for moms for a story I was writing a couple weeks ago, which I'll drop in the chat of just interviews with different moms, and I couldn't believe how many new ones there were. So what's your advice for them?
I mean, one piece of advice that I would give is accept help. You know, I mean, accept help from others. You know, for me, there are lots of times where I'll look up and all of a sudden it's 6 o'clock and I'll realize that my mom's been with Gabriella for like 3 hours. And so you definitely need that when you're trying to run a business, be present with the wines and also your family. So accept help, and then be patient with yourself and know that trust, just like, you know, I think one of the things that I've learned from wine that translates into making me a better person is the cyclical nature of the seasons dictate that it's all going to be okay. And so there's some faith there that is can permeate into sort of our overall perspectives. And I would say that as advice too, which is have some faith that it's going to be okay, and know that you're going to know when it's not okay. So when you said at the beginning, maybe I'm taking on too much, but you know what, you'll know when you are. And until then, it's right for you. And then we all know when we've, you know, I think sometimes we go through life sort of driving by braille. We don't know if we've exceeded a boundary until we've passed it. And then, oh yeah, okay. So I'm more on this side. Oh, that was too far again. So we just need to trust that we'll know when we've exceeded our boundaries.
Yeah, That's good advice. It's hard. We were talking about this before. It's all hard, honestly, and there is no right way to do it. In my own story, I had a really terrific, fabulous job that I loved deeply and dearly, and was an enormous part of who I was as a person, and it was really hard to make that decision to leave Archery Summit after 14 years. And I will say this too, that during my first year that I was not there anymore, I thought, you know, it is so much easier to go to a place where people are paid to do what you say than to stay at home with these little people who do not care and don't pick their stuff up. But another one of the skills, right, that is both learned by parents and helpful in winemaking is to be open and to approach both parenting and winemaking with humility, and that things will work out. And I'm grateful now that I took that time. That was right for me to take that time and be with my kids and create a life that's a little bit different, with more flexibility, with my own business, but a small business, and consulting, but not too much, you know. So I think being mindful of creating balance is a really great thing, and to again have faith that we can do that. I didn't know that I could do that. I thought I was kind of crazy and, you know, had no idea what I was doing and how the world would eventuate, but it has been really terrific, and I am so grateful that I made that choice.
Yeah, I think so far, and I'm, as we all know, very new to this all, is just prioritizing and picking your battles. And I'm prioritizing what I need to every day right now. And then when harvest comes, I'm going to prioritize harvest much more. And we're going to find great daycare for Julian, and he'll see his grandparents hopefully a lot that time, and his dad. So, you know, just ebbing and flowing. I liked what you said, Jessica, a lot about the seasons, and everything is cyclical. So you'll have a really busy time period here, and you'll have a much slower time period maybe during Christmas or during the summer. And yeah, it just kind of cycles around, and it all evens out in the end. And you prioritize your wine sometimes, and you prioritize family time another time. And as long as you surround yourself with the right people and supportive people, I think you'll do what you have to do and make it work well. I've found that, I don't know, it's a whirlwind, but it's worth it to do everything you want to do in life. You only really get one shot at it. Unlike vintages, you get multiple.
A bunch of questions showed up, and we only really have time for one. I will take the question from one Harry Peterson-Nedry. After the first year or so, which are admittedly different for moms and dads, what differences are there between mom and dad winemakers? And should there be differences? He says no is the answer to the second question, so you can just take the first one.
I have no idea. I've never been a dad winemaker, so I don't know.
We'll have to do a dad winemakers panel.
Yeah, Father's Day.
Harry, you need to weigh in on this.
I just say dads don't have boobs. Like, there's a big difference there.
A blessing and a curse.
So stay tuned for the sequel to this panel when we do a tell-all with dad winemakers on how it's different.
I like that.
Thank you so much, everyone. This has been fantastic. It's amazing to get these stories, and thank you for sharing this personal aspects of your lives with us. And thank you, attendees, for making this a really fun panel and adding your thoughts in the chat. Take care, everyone. And I dropped in the chat the link to our map of mom winemaker wineries so that you can support them and buy their wines. So please enjoy that. Happy Mother's Day, everybody. Thanks again.
Happy
Thanks for organizing,
Thank
Julia.
you.
Thanks, everybody.